Good morning friends, once again welcome to another video. That's our fifth video in which I'll tell you about An Angel in Disguise, written by T.S. Arthur. So, this is a very interesting story from the book, and one more I want to tell you that please give a like to this video if you have really liked it, and don't forget to subscribe. So let's start. So this story comprises of three main characters who are Maggie the main, Mr. Thompson, and the minor characters who are Farmer Jones and Mrs. Ellis. So let's start this video. So I'll give you a direct summary of this An Angel in Disguise. First I have to tell you about the characters. Maggie, who is the main character, is the youngest of her family and is tragically crippled from falling from a window 2 years prior. She is unable to leave her bed unless carried in someone's arms. Maggie symbolizes innocence and deep decency because she literally cannot survive without the love and care of someone else. This is seen as a burden at first glance, but Maggie turns out to be a blessing in the Thompson home because she gives Mrs. Thompson purpose as a blessing. Maggie's character illustrates the main theme of the short story that humans cannot survive without other humans to love and care for them. Now let's go to the Mr. Thompson character. Though rough in exterior, Joy Thompson, the wheelwright, had a heart, and it was very tender in some places. He liked children and was pleased to have them come to his shop. Judging by this phrase, we get to know that Mr. Thompson is really a kind-hearted sort of person who loves to spend his time with children. Mr. Thompson is a strong man, but the experience with Maggie touched him greatly. That's why he cried a little bit. And what is more, those tears proved that he was happy that his wife changed. And now let's talk about the minor characters. Farmer Jones and Mrs. Ellis are minor characters and represented in the story. So to state just directly, Farmer Jones, after the coffin was taken out, placed John in his wagon and drove away, satisfied that he had done his part. Mrs. Ellis spoke to Kate with a hurried air, bid your sister good-bye, and drew the tearful children apart, erased scarcely their lips, and had touched in a sobbing farewell. However, we may imagine what kind of people they were. They weren't interested in Maggie's life. They took children as things. They left Maggie alone and no one cared about her future life. To send Maggie to the poorhouse was the easiest way out. So let's start the story. Outside of her home, a woman drops dead of excessive alcoholism. Everyone saw it coming, and really she wasn't all that well liked in her community. But now what must the village do with her three children? Her two eldest are old and fit enough to be put to work in one way or another, but the youngest, Maggie, is chronically ill and of no use to anyone for anything. The general consensus is that she must be taken to the poorhouse if she has no relations to take her in, and no charitable heart around her to fill the role of guardian. Everyone is quick to sentence poor Maggie to her fate. However, no one is willing to actually drop her off into a life of assured misery. A man named Joy Thompson finally goes to check on her. He is instantly charmed by her cherubic demeanor and innocent look. He decided to take her in for the night, but planned on bringing her to the poorhouse the next morning, because he knew his wife would not approve her. When Joy brought Maggie home in his arms, his wife, Mrs. Thompson, was enraged that he had brought that sick brat into her house. Joy convinces the door Mrs. Thompson to take poor Maggie in for a short while. He says Joy begged her to look at her kindly, Jane speak to her kindly, think of her dead mother, and the loneliness, the pain, the sorrow that must be on all her coming life. Now friends, let me tell you, if you didn't understand this paragraph, I will explain you more clearly. But first you and for I am repeating this paragraph for those, means I am continuing this paragraph for those who are able to understand this. So let's continue. While Joey was out at work, Mrs. Thompson spent the day with Maggie and grew very fond of her. The Thompsons ended up keeping Maggie, and she became a blessing. It had been dark and cold and miserable there for a long time, just because his wife had nothing to love and care for out of herself, and so became sour, irritable, ill-tempered, and self-afflicting in the dissolution of a woman's nature. Now the sweetness of that sick child, looking ever to her in love, patience, and gratitude, was as honey to her soul, and she carried her in her heart as well as in her arms, a precious burden. Maggie was an angel in disguise. So let me tell you, in the family, one girl, there's a family, and in that family, there are three brothers and sisters, means two brothers and one sister. This story tells us that here the two eldest are old and fit enough to be put in work. Means two are eldest and they are fit enough to be work. And the third is Maggie, who is actually a differently abled, means like a disabled child. So when he goes, means where he's because of his disabledness, his parents doesn't allow him to be in their house. So Mrs. Maggie, means the minor characters, Mr. Thompson adopts Maggie, and she's the main character one. Mr. Thompson adopts Maggie, and then he carries her to her home, to his home. But seeing Maggie, a disabled child, Mrs. Thompson regrets her and tells directly that I don't wanna keep this disabled child. But due to the story, means according to the story, Mr. Thompson argues with Mrs. Thompson and tells that she is a very innocent child and she would be blessed by us. Means she would be blessed by the people who believe that she is a disabled child, she can't do anything. So that's only the goes the story. And at last, yeah, the ill-tempered woman, Mrs. Thompson, the sweetness of that sick child. She looks at the sweetness of the sick child, and looking ever to her in love, patience, and gratitude was as honey to her soul, and she carried her in her heart as well as in her arms, a precious burden. So Maggie was an angel in disguise this type. Means this way, the Maggie became an angel in disguise to Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Thompson, excluding his family because they regrets her.